Hey, it's Katie Moran,
And MJ Coppola.
and we're sharing an 11-part mindful mental health miniseries called RNTKY, sharing 11 reasons not to kill yourself. It started as a blog post, YouTube video, and now a Discord community where we host gratitude challenges. Episodes will be coming out Tuesdays and Thursdays between Thanksgiving and New Year's Day. So today is there are movies to watch, and movies have been something unique to me that has really changed my life and perspective. So, movies have the unique quality of transporting you somewhere else. You can travel through your mind when witnessing the images on the screen. They can teach you lessons that you may need to learn at that exact moment you watch it. They can be a source of commonality and connection with someone else if you both have seen the same movie, even if you have differences of opinion. So find a movie that speaks to you, and you can even start a blog about it, which is what I did with Stay Weird, Stay Different blog. So MJ, what do you think about movies?
Oh my gosh, movies have been such a huge part of my healing process. Uh, so like way back, I remember like really starting my conscious like healing journey with like therapists and stuff. And I'm kind of moved from music being part of like the main part of my own like kind of escape to be having movies be. And it was like early 2000s, I think. And that was like the bulk of the wowness for me, like the wow factor of like how a movie can completely change like your uh your like emotional makeup while you're watching that movie. Like you're literally in the thing. uh and so it can be dangerous, but it can also be like so cathartic because you're just not you for 2 hours, or however long the movie is. And you can connect. Like, I know you have a story um, revolving that, connecting through movies, but like, just think like you go to a movie like a Star Wars, for instance, is like, like if you're a Star Wars person, like, other Star Wars people are like, you can go down the street and like see somebody with a Star Wars shirt, and you're like, hey, like, how do you think about this thing and a character? Like it's almost culty in a way. Um, and I think that's a great way to like um, be able to connect not only with other people but pieces of yourself. Kind of like I said with one of the other episodes, we talk about stories, and it's kind of played off of that, but also there's this, you can have a movie that you adore. Like I have a few movies that are my favorite, and every time I watch those movies, I do feel like even I could recite the entire movie and I still would find pieces of it in and out that speak to me differently at different times than I would. And I just think that's so cool that you could watch the same movie several times and get different things out of it. So
Yeah, I totally relate. I think movies have been probably the thing I've connected most with other people um, when I've been in hospitals, because a lot of the times some of my favorite movies are literary adaptations. So they were books first, and the books are incredible, but I feel like books aren't really always accessible to everyone. And a lot of people have seen the movie versions of a lot of books.
yeah, I definitely think I mean movies, yeah, it's unfortunate that books aren't always accessible to people. Um, but movies I think is a really good way. I mean, like we really can connect with who's on the screen, um, or not. Like it's a really good way sometimes too to like explore why you feel certain ways about characters. Um, Even so much so, like if you have somebody to bounce those things off of, it can be really helpful to kind of dissect some of that in your life. People who why certain things bother you the way they do.
Yeah, and also it gives you an escape, inspiration, and there's this idea that we've talked a lot about, suspending negative feelings and how movies can kind of like feel like a friend when you don't have a friend.
Yeah, so many times. So I think we all have this where we have like that quintessential like TV show or movie that's like kind of playing in the background so that like a comfort show, you know, it's like a blanket. Um yeah, I definitely I have a bunch of those.
Yeah, me
So
too. What are some of yours?
oh gosh. So I like early Guy Ritchie films. So like Snatch is like one of my favorite movies. Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. And like I just love that kind of thing. I tend to have stuff like, oh, Monty Python, like the whole Flying Circus series. It seems like every time I get sick, I put on Monty Python like in the background. I could be like 105 fever and there's Monty Python somewhere. For some reason, seems to be like my go-to. I think partially because when I was in high school, I was in drama club, and that's like all we talked about, and like, all we did was like Monty Python sketches. And
Mhm.
it's like a part of my life in high school that I didn't feel like it's like one of the only times when I was in high school that I didn't feel like misplaced or out of the loop or like depressed. It was like a way to express my creativity and also like be a part of something that I felt like I was part of something. And so I think that kind of translated into later on in life when I feel like sick and I need a hug. It feels very much like a hug to watch those things. What about you?
Yeah, for me, it's like Shawshank Redemption, Imitation Game, The Color Purple. So mostly like adopted films.
Mm,
Stand By
yeah.
Me.
Ah, yes, Stand by Me. It's a good one. Yeah. What else? But I also think like not so much in the realm of like to go back to movies that make me feel like I get to experience something else and also heal at the same time. There's a movie called Magnolia. Um, it's like a 1999 film. I cannot remember who's in it necessarily, but it's kind of along the same lines of like I like movies that are like dramatic and psychological. And what I like about that film is that you can relate to either knowing somebody who would relate to that character because they're all different characters, just like mini stories throughout the entire thing. And then at the end, it's kind of like you figure out how they all come together, like how they all know each other somehow. Like
Mhm.
the nurse's story relates to this other person's story who was like, somebody else like randomly, you can't see it through the whole thing. But then at the end, it makes you feel like, oh my gosh, like we really are all connected in a way. Like it really is a small world. Like how many times have you gone somewhere and you're feeling down or whatever, and you find out that the person in front of you knows somebody that you know, and you're like, wow, this is weird because it's not even the same state, or
Mhm.
it's like that movie made me feel like that. um and just the characters are relatable. It is sad. Like there are things in it that are emotionally cringy in the movie. So trigger warning as far as that's concerned. Um, and I just remember for the first time watching that movie and feeling like both this huge emotional weight and also like light at the same time, because I very much felt like this is an example of how everybody's, you know, connected, and how I can feel related to those people's things and feel like I can listen to those stories and still like maintain my own autonomy. It was like one of the first
Mhm.
times I recognized that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. And that's something that I think entertainment does across the board, like even specifically music, and this idea that I think it was JP, who's a part of RNTKY, he has mentioned on some of our spaces that when you listen to music, you have to do so responsibly. And if you're feeling really low, don't listen to that song that's gonna make you feel more low. And I think that's so important to recognize. If a movie is triggering for you, don't watch that movie. Watch movies that feel like an escape, that make you feel better, that suspend those negative emotions. And what do you think about that in terms of like someone's responsibility if they're trying to manage their mental health with what they put into their mind?
Yeah, I had a friend in my meditation class like 10 years ago that would just always say like garbage in, garbage out. And she still says that as like a thing. She's a teacher, so she like says that to her students. And I think there's something to be said about that. And I'm not saying like things are garbage to watch, and I'm sure there is, but and along the lines with like what JP says, I thoroughly believe in that. It is kind of our responsibility. There is such a range of things out there to watch, to listen to engage in. And I think we can get swept up in the emotions of that thing, of whatever we're watching, in such a way that it can bring us deeper into a depression. And it can act as a distraction, and also it can act as like if you're watching something really heavy, um, something like, let's say you have a lot of trauma involving like loss, and you're watching something like loss and betrayal, and you're watching something like, oh, I'm just going to watch like Game of Thrones. Probably not a great like show to be watching if you're still dealing with a lot of that emotional trigger. And that's not to say you shouldn't watch it at all. It's like, are you feeling in such a way like at night? I know it's probably not good for me to watch a lot of those psychological dramas, like the ones that make your mind just totally break when you watch them. Like that's not a good time for me, because that's more of a time where I'm emotionally vulnerable. I have more of like a tendency to take on the character's emotions without being able to cleanse myself of that afterward. And I think it's really important for us to like, I think it's JP who also says this, where like, but I know it's not just like a him thing, but I know he says it. He says something along the lines of like, if you're feeling like you want to listen to a sad song, like maybe not listen to a sad, like if you really feel like you need that song, um you know it's like doing the things that we don't want to do, and then those are the things that we probably should be doing. Is kind of almost the same with music and movies sometimes, where if we're in a high emotional state of some kind and we want to gravitate towards that like validating movie, the movie that's going to make us feel more like that thing, because we want to connect, right? We want to have that connection with a movie, or somebody, we're not alone, so we want to have that. But at the same time, is that we have to ask ourselves, is that movie going to make us feel more like the way that we are? Is that going to make us go into a deep spiral? I have had that mistake before, where I've watched movies in a high emotional state before. And when I go to bed, or before I go to bed, I'm starting to have those suicidal ideations, those like thoughts in my brain, like, why am I even here? Like it makes me have an existential crisis sometimes. And I think there really is something to be said. Like if we're sad and listening to sad music, can we pull ourselves out of that afterward? Are we just in it because we need to just run through the emotions, or are we in it because we're trying to get the validation for that emotion? And either one of those are fine. But if we're doing it and we're stuck there, that's where the problem lies. Especially for like, I can say, especially for myself, because I know I can get stuck in that. And then that's all I want to do is be stuck in that emotion. Because even though it's a yucky feeling, it still can be addictive. So
Yeah, I think I have a movie like that, the movie Sleepers. It's such an incredible movie, and I feel like it is uplifting, but a lot of it is triggering for me to watch because there's like sex abuse in it, and it could just be hard to watch and kind of like bring me into depression and think about things I don't really want to think about that has happened in my own life. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll watch like clips from it, like not the triggering ones, like the my favorite clips from it. And it's a book too, so sometimes I'll like reread the the parts in the book I have like highlighted that I just think are so beautiful and so well written. And I think a lot of the times, like specifically if you're a writer, like you can try and like channel certain emotions to write. And like I have this with like whether it be like poetry, like sometimes I'll do like poetry that is like specifically the things that happen in my life, or poetry that's like uplifting for like summation 52, or like writing on fiction, or whether it be writing nonfiction or like writing content about a specific period in my life. Like I have songs I'll always go back to, and like movie trailers I'll like watch over, and like that always kind of like sets the tone for me to like get in that space, like that headspace. But I think like you said, like it has to be something that's like not an addiction, that like you don't like when you're not writing, you don't go to that place just to like feel it. Like you actually just use it to kind of like as a tool or technique to get to the place so that you can have your best writing, so that your writing can be more profound, so that you feel like you can connect with the words on the page and really like put your heart into it.
Yeah, I can really like intention, you know, doing those things for intentional purposes, and big advocate for like if you feel like how many times I don't know. I know I hear some of my guy friends that do this where like, I watched this movie because I felt like I needed a good cry. And like so they use like that kind of thing. It's not just guys, by the way, but I'm just saying that because I know a couple of guys who do that. Um, where they need to get something out. They need to like feel that emotion. And because one of their trauma responses is that like I have to be this thing, they can do it in the safety of their own like space and feel that emotion and pick a movie that's they know is going to like initiate those responses in them. And but again, it's intentional, it's responsible, or it's done in a responsible setting. um and I, and I really really truly feel like there is so much power in movies and TV shows and stories and books, but movies especially because it's really like it really takes you on a ride. Like a good movie director, a good movie writer will take you so far into that TV show or that movie that you truly do feel how those characters feel. And that is so beautiful and also can be really dangerous for especially for people like myself who tend to really like one of my natural responses to things is taking on other people's emotions, and that can also like really take me into a bad place, and it can lead to overwhelm, and that in turn can lead me to that those the spirally depression-y suicidal moments. So I have to be very careful about that.
Yeah, I think like that idea of like responsibility and knowing what to watch and when to watch it, like again going back to intention, like how important it is to be intentional. And I really like adapted films, and I think they're like so beautiful, and I think there's something special about adapted films that a lot of movies don't have. But specifically I think Good Will Hunting is like the only movie that I feel like feels like an adapted literary adaptation that isn't. And I think that's like so beautiful. Like I love that movie. And you talk about like kind of like watching things responsibly, like I feel like that's one of the ones like know which ones like are just like uplifting, and know which ones you need to be careful with. And another movie that I think about, because Good Will Hunting is one of those ones that's just like super uplifting, and it's like no matter when I like watch it, it's like just positive vibes. But a lot of the times, like other ones sometimes that are adapted, I think they can go deeper into specific issues, because in literature there's so much depth to like the conflict in the story that a lot of movies don't necessarily have. But what I like about it is that a lot of them have really powerful symbols, and I think sometimes when we see symbols on screen, it is more powerful for us. And Stephen King talks about this in On Writing, his book about writing. And he talked about how something that was really powerful in Carrie was like that there was like this symbol of like the blood, like in different parts of the book and then the film. And he said it wasn't intentional. So I think when I think about things like that, I think about how, whether it be you're a screenwriter or you're a writer writing a book and you want it to be adapted to film, just kind of like the idea of using symbols in your own writing, whether it's intentional or not intentional. I think sometimes the more powerful ones are when it's like unintentional, because it just shows what is in our subconscious. And like using that to like create specific art forms that will later help other people feel less alone, I think is so powerful. And like how like when we kind of like write something, I feel like it is something we do in solitude, and it is something that feels alone, but there's this like future collective healing or solidarity that I think is so important to recognize, that like in our aloneness, like that's what makes other people feel less alone. And I always think that's such a paradox, but it's really the truth. And for people who go through mental health struggles, like I know both of us have been through that, and now when we can connect with other people, they feel less alone. But like for what we went through, like when we went through that, we felt alone, and in our aloneness it allows us to make other people feel less alone, which I think is just such a paradox, but also really beautiful.
It is. It's funny how like this weird duality thing happens with a lot of that stuff. I always find it funny. Like you can have two things that seemingly are opposite, but you have to hold those two things like with you. There's a quote. I wish I remembered it. I used to have it plastered on like my wall somewhere, and I moved, and now I don't have it. But it's like something like the oh god, I'm gonna butcher it, but it's like um true intelligence is when you can hold two opposite truths in the same light, or something like that. I can't, I might be butchering it, but the whole idea is that sometimes we have things that feel like opposites, but they're both true, and you try to figure out like how that adjusts to your life. But that's like a whole that could be a whole podcast all on its own. So I'm gonna leave that there.
Is it a Fitzgerald quote?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. One should, for example, be able to see that things are hopeless, yet be determined to make them otherwise.
Yes, that's exactly it. Yep. That, and it's so that like when I lived in my camper, I would have to say I was probably the most healing, but also the most possibly destructive part of my life. I had my own space, but I would go through these like episodes of intense depression. Like, but I was more conscious of it than I ever have been in my entire life. It wasn't something that I was trying to run away from. At this point in my life, I was trying to figure out how to exist in it, in those moments where like, okay, how am I going to pull myself out of this, but how am I going to honor where I still am, like not try to just like gaslight myself into not feeling something. And that quote I would have like I would something about campers is they're not consistent as far as like temperature goes. So I knew that quote would have to go like right where my like temperature gauge, so I can like mess with the furnace. And every time I would turn the furnace up or down or the AC up or down, I would see that quote. And it was so powerful to me because it was just a reminder that like I can feel this way and I can still know that something else not only exists as far as emotion goes, but I can be determined to not fix that, because that's not really the right word I'm looking for, but I can be determined to make that less of a thing. Like hopelessness does exist, and also hope exists, and that can exist. And in that moment, they existed at the same time every time I look at that quote. So
Yeah, that's really powerful. I don't think I've ever heard the second part of that quote.
yeah, it's quite beautiful. I'm like, and that kind of like brings me to like another movie thing, is that sometimes we can have like parts of a movie that mean a lot to us and can drive us forward. Like it is like one of my favorite things. Like I'm a sticky like a post-it note junkie. So like I'll take a quote from a movie and like stick it on somewhere, or have it come up on my calendar once a month just to remind me of those things. Like I think it's okay to do those things. And you were saying earlier how sometimes there'll be movies that we love, but not all the parts of it make us feel like great. And it's totally okay to have like a YouTube playlist of just like nice like parts of movies that you find uplifting, or quotes from those movies. And like I have an Instagram like folder full of just Instagrams that make me feel certain ways, so that I can go in and be like, I feel empowered because I just listened to like poems by Maya Angelou, and like, you know, different random people, you know, saying stuff, or movie quotes that come up on my Instagram. So you know, use those things. Those, you know, we have technology that we can use for those things. And it can also be, you know, technology can definitely be a thing that is used instead of abused. So
Yeah, I think that's so important. And just in the case of like how everything can kind of like, I think we talked about this in one of the more recent episodes about moderation, and this idea that anything can really be too good or too bad, like depending on like if you take it to the extreme or excess.
yeah, Buddhism we call it the middle way. It's I kind of like the way that sounds, because it sounds like a road that's just going through the middle of something. I like the visual of that, so it's a good visual to remember.
If there was one movie that changed your perspective on something, what was that movie, and how did it change your perspective?
Oh, come on. There are so many movies that changed my perspective on things. The first one that comes to mind, and I think it's only because I was watching it like a few weeks ago, is I almost embarrassed to say it, but Fight Club. Like that whole movie is just one big like I just want to take my head and just like throw it across the room sometimes when I watch that movie, because like I just I mean, the first time you watch it, you get to the end and you're like, what the actual F? Like, um, those are the types of movies I love. Those are the ones that make me think deeper. But those are also the ones I have to be careful about, because I will get into an existential crisis spiral. And I know I'm prone to those things, but also those kind of movies are the ones that um, help me create the most authentic uh, like poems and writings for me. It puts me in that state of openness and shadowy presence that really help. And those are the times of my life where I feel like I've gotten the most profound ahas. So I have to say, like, it's not necessarily the only movie or the most impactful movie, but it's definitely one that has contributed to a lot of subconscious shadowy ahas for me, and that has led to healing in some way.
Yeah, one that comes to mind for me, because it's what my blog is named after, is the imitation game, and this idea that like you don't have to change who you are to fit in, and that sometimes it's in being different that you can make a difference.
That's a beautiful one. I love Imitation Game. It's a very good movie. That's awesome.
Yeah, but going back to how you talk about, like, again, that idea about like watching responsibly, I think a lot of movies that are like super powerful sometimes can put you in like an existential crisis, and I think sometimes that's why we relate so profoundly to them, is because it's part of what we're going through, and like just being able to gauge like whether or not something is helping you move through a certain emotion, or if something is keeping you stuck, is, I think, kind of like, for me, the gauge. Like, will this keep me stuck in this emotion, or will this help me move through the natural flow of emotions that I need to feel in order to live the life that I want to live?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important lesson to keep in mind.
Yeah, I always say movies raised me, because my parents, I'm one of four, so the middle children are always a little neglected, and for me, I was always watching TV, because my parents, when they were home, they'd have it on, and it was like always a movie on, or anything. And actually a lot of my childhood was putting on shows, and like I would reenact all of those movies. I had like such an obsession with Julia Roberts, and I would watch all of her movies. And actually that's how I realized acting was a profession, because I was like, how can she be all these different people? and and I would watch all of her movies, and then that's how I like found out that she was like actually an actress, and like the movies aren't real, and that it's just kind of like this whole process that people create movies. So I was pretty young. I was um younger than second grade, I think, because second grade was when I was like, I want to do acting. And I did that for like since childhood, I think to like maybe 23 or 24. Um, and I think it's been something that has always been just so powerful. I think like recognizing that movies can kind of like teach you, I think, like even morality, like kind of like the difference between what's
Mhm.
right and wrong. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that. And for me, I think movies taught me empathy. I think I'm so empathic because I've seen how people can go through something and feel something from it right after. And I think when you watch movies, it's very clear how one thing connects to the other. But a lot of the times in life, people hide their emotions and suppress their emotions. So I feel like that line isn't that through, like it's not a through line, kind of like you can't really track like this person did this because this happened, or this person felt this way because this person treated them like this. And I didn't read much as a child. I was really into movies, and it wasn't until college that I started reading, and books became what movies were to me in my childhood.
That's funny. It was kind of the opposite for me.
Really?
Growing up. Yeah, I spent most of my time as childhood was spent either outside. I was like, latchkey kid shoved outside when the lights came on. That's when you came in, kind of thing. So I didn't watch a lot of TV. I did have certain like kids shows, like TV shows that I would watch with like my friends. But it was a lot of like, I really shut myself in and read like a decent portion of my childhood between the reading and the radio. Like music was just like such a huge, like I truly feel like music raised me. And books did the rest. as like really, I really truly did a lot of shutting myself in my room and just disappearing. Yeah. And then it wasn't until like high school that I really started to explore the acting, the movies, the TV shows, like all of that stuff. I think because I had more range, um, I started to like really socialize more in high school, like actually go over people's houses instead of just shutting myself in my room for the first like 12, 13 years of my life. So I think for me, so that's like the beginning of me realizing that like, oh, like look at all of it. Like I could be all these different people. Like this is crazy. I don't have to just like be myself all the time. Uh, so yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, so if there's one message you'd love to leave everyone with today, what would it be?
Mm, that I mean, I want to go back to that F. Scott Fitzgerald quote, really, is that um both things can exist. You are um there's another quote that's similar to that, but it's like more emotional. It's one that says like you are perfect just the way that you are, and there is room for growth. And it really, I love that quote so much. So I just want to say that when we look at movies and TV shows, sometimes we both can see who we are in those people, and we can see what we're not, and sometimes we can compare. And I think it's important to know that you can be both of those things. You can be a person who's perfect in all the ways and still have room for growth and see yourself in all of those things.
Yeah, my one message would be if there is a movie that you would love to see that doesn't exist yet, commit to writing it.
Write it. Absolutely.
Because we need
Do
it.
it. We need so many more. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.